Welcome, boys and girls. Christine here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, and one of the features that I firmly believe Creative Assembly should introduce in the game, specifically campaign customization. Now, there is a mod that already does this, but I do think that Creative Assembly should introduce it on a baseline level. The only thing that we can customize right now in the game is the AI stats modifier. We can't change anything else. But if you look at Total War Pharaoh, we can change a huge amount of things that do really make Pharaoh campaigns that much more interesting. So, if you're starting a campaign right now in Warhammer 3, let's take Foreground, because I think it's a good baseline of a campaign to use. You'll start with either a Tier 1 or higher settlement, which you'll be able to then turn into Tier 2. And then you have a choice. Do you focus on your economy, which would work to be sure, or do you focus on your growth at the cost of that economy? Or do you focus on a variety of unit recruitment options? So you have that choice between economy, unit variety, and growth. And usually speaking, the smart thing to do if you're looking to maximize your output from a campaign perspective is to either focus on your growth to the detriment of everything else, or to focus on your growth and your economy. The reason you focus on your growth is because of the building slot system. The reason you focus on your economy is because you need money. And this means that one of the best ways to play a campaign, and this has been the case for quite a few years now in Total War, but the best way to play a campaign is as such. You start the campaign and you start conquering, you deal with your initial battles, like in this case of Foreground, you cannot resolve it even on the highest difficulty. You may want to fight those battles manually because you can get a bit more money and experience if you fight those battles manually, at least the field battle. And then you just recruit a bunch of Tier 1 unit, whatever is available in your respective race. In the case of Dwarves, it's Miners with Blasting Charges and Dwarf Warriors, or even Dwarf Warriors with Great Weapons. That is your early game army. And that is what you're going to be recruiting if you're looking to maximize your campaign potential for quite a few turns, because this will lead to a cascade effect later on where your settlements are growing faster and you also have a good amount of money in your campaign later on, as opposed to playing the bankruptcy game in your campaign where you're just pushing everything to the limit and you're relying on post-battle loot. But here's the problem. This creates a situation in a campaign where either you have fewer and less interesting units to recruit because you're focusing so heavily on the early game economy and early game growth, so you have fewer and less interesting units to get, even as races Dwarves, which have a ton of options at Tier 2, but you're never going to be able to recruit all of them because of the way unit recruitment structures have. Like, for instance, I would never recruit Rangers in any Dwarf campaign, as an example. And even though, like, Karazakrak has a bunch of building slots I can use, I just can't afford diversifying my unit variety. And even if I could afford the money, I will lose out on the growth situation, which means that the higher tier units, which are inherently better, but also interesting to use, things like gyrocopters with brimstone guns, gyro bombers, etc., I would lose out on that, or I would get them later on. So instead, you have a choice. You either pay that cost early on and just have a really mediocre early game or limited early game, but it pays off later on, or you do go for that diversity, but it limits your campaign potential, or you go for the third option, which is abuse the game. And how do you abuse the game? Well, here's what you do. There's all kinds of options in respect to this, but one of the things you would do is go to various factions on turn 1, even before you fight the first battle. You go to various factions and you declare war on their enemies, especially if it's insignificant enemies that will never pose any kind of threat to you. So, for instance, declare war on the Skaven, declare war on some Greenskins, declare war on Kazdrak, declare war on Tempelhof, and so on and so forth. That is what you want to do in order to maximize your campaign potential early on in a campaign. And you don't stop doing this at any point. You even go further in this respect, because you then consider things like region trading for infinite money, You then consider dealing with Kafan caravans. You then consider deliberately sending lords and heroes on distant lands just to declare war on those distant lands, or getting vision through quest battles just in order to get money while you're pushing growth and unit variety to the limit. And let me tell you something. It works. Undeniably so. It is also not a great campaign loop. It's not a great gameplay dynamic where the best way, if you want to actually have fun and have fun units and get variety of units, and we're not just talking about dwarves with flying units or artillery, we're talking about the Empire with cavalry, we're talking about Cafe, we're talking about Dark Elves, we're talking about High Elves. You are encouraged to push it. It is one of the best and more dynamic ways to play the game. And this is where campaign customization could really come in. Now, to be sure, Creative Assembly could also just give us more money or lower construction costs and accept the fact that people want faster paced campaigns instead of like, oh, a provincial capital costs so much, or you have so many different unit recruitment buildings. There's a lot of issues at stake here. And funnily enough, Pharaoh actually solved a lot of those, because in Pharaoh you don't have this many buildings for the sake of recruiting units. You have a couple, but you don't have 5, 6 freaking buildings. 7 freaking buildings, 7 different buildings for the sake of unit recruitment. Now old races have 7 different recruitment buildings, hero buildings, and some of the better races in the game do have fewer of them, but you understand the kind of problem that comes in here. When you're limiting recruitment by buildings, and when you're limiting things by growth, when you're limiting things by economy, it doesn't make a campaign harder. It just makes them more limited. It doesn't create better flexibility, or doesn't make for better strategic thinking. It just pushes you to engage in the bullshittery. That is my big issue with it. And this is where campaign customization can come in, because you can do a lot of different things with campaign customization. You could even limit this behavior of, region trading and all that, and force everyone. You could limit AI cheats, for instance, while maintaining AI aggressive behavior. Because one of the reasons I play on a higher difficulty is because the AI is very passive on lower difficulties. So that's one thing. But you could give everyone, not just the player, you could give everyone a lot of growth, lower construction costs, but maybe even higher upkeep. There's all kinds of options. Things like upkeep, things like growth, things like control, things like hero capacity. Those would not be solutions to the problems various races have in the game, but it is a hell of a band-aid. Again, it is a band-aid. It's not really a solution. It is a band-aid, and Creative Assembly does need to put in more effort, but it would go a long way. For instance, let me just give you an example. Let me think of an example. Think of Slaanesh, right, in Wolf 1. What is one of the key issues of Slaanesh? Well, the key issue for Slaanesh is, or the key issues of Slaanesh right now, 2 of the key issues. 1, they have limited recruitment slots, so every single unit they recruit is pretty valuable because they can't easily replace them. So losing an entire stack of Slaanesh is pretty damaging. The second thing is a lack of casualty replenishment. And while I do expect the Slaanesh rework to be pretty good, I think you could also make Slaanesh in a much better race if you had 2 things. A better casualty replenishment for them, because they're one of the few races that doesn't have that, and just a better way of recruiting units. Or think of Tomb Kings with their limited army capacity or unit capacity combined, or Beastmen with the way they play their campaigns. So many issues. So many of these smaller things that could be fixed pretty quickly, and there's mods that do that. But if Creative Assembly added this kind of system inherently, like less caps, faster research, also research, we could talk about that, like how slow the research tree is. Or imagine a campaign where you would start a campaign and everyone would have all of the research unlocked. It would be pretty broken, right? Or half the research or a quarter of the research unlocked from the beginning. So let's say all of this and all of this would be unlocked from the very beginning. That would make for a heck of a campaign, I gotta tell you, as the dwarves. But also playing against them, because if you had it as the player, so would AI factions, and it would create such a different dynamic. Some things would be much harder, some things would be easier. There's so many different ways this could play out in a campaign. It would absolutely benefit races with better research trees, inherently better economies just that play the game better, but it will also make the weaker races that much more competitive on a campaign and that much better to play and more dynamic. Instead of playing a campaign for 40 turns or 50 turns or 60 turns and you get to unlock tier 4 and then your campaign is already over by the last 20 turns. Because that's another thing in the way that Creative Assembly handles difficulty. It is so front-ended. That's something else we could talk about, campaign customization. Maybe a setting to add progressive AI cheats so that AI factions may start weaker at the beginning of a campaign, but that they get progressively stronger as you play it, as opposed to the front-ended way that difficulty has been handled in Total War for so many years now. Those are just options. There are many other things. You could also make a campaign slower if you want to. Pharaoh does allow that. You could make diplomacy easier. You could make it harder. You could make confederation easier. Or vassalization harder, requiring more value in order to pull those things off. It would depend on how much they would add. But to be clear, there are mods that already do this to an extent or another, except construction time, though there's a mod that gives you faster construction time as well in a campaign. But I think it would be just something really, really good for Creative Assembly to add to game that would increase the game's longevity and make people enjoy their campaigns more if they could customize them to their own personal liking. And then we can have a million discussions about what the best campaign settings are for various campaigns. That's all I had to say. Questine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. Stay tuned for more.